الشعب اللي تمشى بالحفاظ عالشوك عجلي وعلى النار.
بن بولعيد واسمو مصطفى، علي لابوانت وبدي عمر، القصبة ما زالها واقفة وما زالوا عساس الدار، ما زالها سعلة السقيفة وما زالها حرمة الجار. أنا يا بلادي راني عارف هما ما كانوش عارفين،
دهشوا نهار علي ما توقف، احنا عادتنا نموتوا واقفين، نموتوا على النيف والشرف، نموتوا على الوطن والدين، علمنا بلا ريح يرفرف، احنا هما الجزائريين. أنا يا بلادي على بالي هما ما كانوش فاهمين،
حبوا يديو البلاد ديالي، حسبونا ماناش قادرين، فكتهم حسيبة بنبوعلي الجميلة تونسى الأخرين، من حقك يا الجزائر تولولي ولدتي نساو رجال حرين. أنا يا بلادي اسمحيلي ما قدرتش نذكرهم كاملين،
واش نذكر واش نخلي، شهداء رواحهم طاهرين، مازالهم في قلبي وفي بالي، ربي يرحمهم أجمعين، والقصبة مازالها ديالي وسط الدار والعرس واقفين.
معليش يا القصبة وريلهم
قرصان رياس وساطيل، على عروج وخير الدين احكي لهم،
وفهم الناس اللي جاهلين
واللي الجزائر ماهيش ليهم، ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس، كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين،
باللي الجزائر ماشي ديالهم ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس، كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Jazair Hope France and all the attendees. So another evening, another topic, today a geopolitical one. As announced, it is about whether the war in Gaza is an escalation of the war in Ukraine, reflecting another aspect of the same confrontation between the existing world order, US/NATO-led, or what we can call the imperialism, and a would-be new multipolar world, a fairer world. For this, we are honored and lucky to have from South America in Santiago, Chile, Professor Vijay Prakash speak about this. Vijay, nice to meet you, and thank you very much for accepting to speak to Jazair Hope and to our followers who are mostly from Algeria in the country and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Vijay.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a great aficionado of the Algerian Revolution, and may the hope of the Algerian Revolution continue.
Thank you very much, Vijay. We will have to talk to that also. We are indeed very lucky to have Vijay tonight, not only because of his background as a historian, journalist, the author of 40 books. Yes, 40 books, that much. He is the executive director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, but also because of the Indian and South American perspective he brings, which we are not exposed to often. VG, indeed, as an Indian professor doing geopolitics from Santiago, Chile, it is quite unique. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
What can I say? I mean, I've been a journalist more for more time than a professor. I mean, I'm not a professor anymore. To be honest with you, I run a research institute, but I think of myself as somebody who is, a documenter of world events. I want to put my fingers inside the soil of history and try to understand what's happening. It's very important to me to find a way to travel to different places and understand in a deep way what's going on. For instance, I've covered the conflict, the occupation of the Palestinians, been to the West Bank, to East Jerusalem, been to Gaza, been inside the 48 lines of Israel, visited refugee camps in the Sur of Lebanon, in Jordan, and so on. I feel that when you want to write about an issue, try to understand an issue as complicated and important as the liberation of the Palestinian people, you have to dig into it. You have to understand the history. You have to understand the sense, the great deep sense of frustration amongst the Palestinian people. Their agenda has not been realized. In fact, they feel that there is a reverse. They are going in reverse. The car is not going forward, it's going backward. There are Israeli officials talking about the Gaza Nakba. In fact, many years ago, I spoke with Ilyas Khoury, the Lebanese novelist. He's the editor of the Journal of Palestinian Studies. Ilyas Khoury told me, listen, Vijay, there wasn't a Nakba in 1948. There wasn't one Nakba. There's been a permanent Nakba from 1948 till now. The Israelis have been trying to make life so difficult for the Palestinians that they give up and they go to Jordan, they go to Lebanon, they go to Egypt, they go to Algeria, they go anywhere else. They go to Chile, which has the largest population of Palestinians outside the Middle East. And this permanent Nakba can only really be understood if you are there, if you go and see what the apartheid wall is doing, if you see what the checkpoints do, the humiliation, the way in which Israel bombs Gaza, without mercy. It's bombing without mercy. It's very important to understand that. Recently, my friend Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine went to the United States to meet with US President Joe Biden, but he left from Kiev. The airport is still functioning. The Russians haven't bombed without mercy. They
Yes.
left the airport. They've left the power plants going. They left the water supply. The Israelis from 1948 have tried to prevent the Palestinians from living in a way that's decent. There used to be an airport in Gaza. I don't know if you know this. Gaza used to have an airport when the United Nations was there. Israelis said no airport, no proper port for the Palestinians, not even really roads. For most of the crossings into what is called Israel, the roads are very bad. You got to see this. A journalist must see this, must feel what it feels like to be a Palestinian in Jenin, to be a Palestinian in Khan Yunis. Palestinians are not abstractions. They don't exist in our minds. We say free Palestine. These are real people
Real people,
who are
yeah.
being butchered and humiliated. And therefore, when you say, the perspective of an Indian in South America and so on, but really the job of people like you and me is to have the perspective of people who often are not listened to, are
Yes.
not heard. And that's what that's why you do the show you do, and that's why I come here to talk with you.
Thank you very much for that. Indeed, actually, you partly answered my first question, which was about after more than 2 months of the 7th of October attacks. What are your main takeaways, and how do you see this unfolding? In a nutshell, because it's not really our topic today, but I want to have your views on this. Go ahead.
It's a very important subject. I mean, look, frankly speaking, again, if you accept the theory of the permanent Nakba, then what I'm going to say now is not going to be a surprise. You see, the permanent Nakba means that the Israelis want the Palestinians to leave between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They want the Palestinians to be gone. They want the Palestinians to leave the area. This has been the policy since the 1930s, even before the State of Israel was created. So, what the Israelis are trying to do is to remove the Palestinians slowly from Gaza City down to Khan Yunis, down to Rafah, and into Egypt. They are trying to make life so hard, they want to move the Palestinians out. Now, the issue is that the Palestinians, of course, understand that if they even temporarily leave Gaza, the Israelis will never let them come back. You see, Israel has violated UN Resolution 194, which gives the Palestinians the right to return. That's from 1948. The Palestinians have the right to return. That's a UN resolution. So they have not honored UN Resolution 194, right to return. They are not going to now let Palestinians return to Gaza. They are going to try to create all of Gaza as part of Israel. They're going to annex Gaza. They have been annexing the West Bank, the settlement policy, and so on. So, what do I think is going to happen? I think right now, the Palestinian armed factions, including Hamas, have been fighting the Israelis street by street. They are trying to slow the Israeli progress down. Will Hamas be able to have some gains against the Israeli army? Will they be able to inflict enough casualties? Will the Arab states put pressure on Tel Aviv to stop the war? In other words, the only way to stop the Gaza Nakba is if the Israelis feel they cannot continue with the killing, the bombardment, and so on. That's the only way to stop the Gaza Nakba. The three elements can stop them. Number one, the Palestinian resistance, inflicting damage on the Israeli army, and that creates problems inside Israel. Second, the Arab states in particular, putting pressure on Israel. Egypt, Mr. Sisi just re-elected. King Abdullah II saying to Netanyahu, if you don't stop the violence, we will break the peace agreement. You see, Egypt has a large air force. Why don't they fly their planes over the skies of Gaza, saying this is a no-fly zone? You remember Libya? Remember what the West did to Libya? The West said, we're going to do a no-fly zone. What about a no-fly zone over Gaza? Why doesn't the Egyptians do it? What's the point of having all these planes? What's the point of Mr. Sisi spending all this money buying military equipment and you're not going to use it to defend the Palestinians? You know, I want us to remember that in 1948, Egyptian army was defeated by the Israelis. That humiliated the Egyptian army so much that the free officers emerged and General Gamal Abdel Nasser led the coup against the king. Why? Because they felt humiliated by the defeat against Israel. In this case, my friend, the Egyptian army is not even being tested. They are sitting in their bases doing nothing. Nothing.
Absolutely. I would make an exception of my country, not because I'm an Algerian, but we are far from the geography, and we are trying really to do whatever we can do. But it's shameful for the neighbors of Palestine, the situation that we are witnessing currently. Vijay, before we go into the key point of our discussion today, I would like to present to the people following us your website. Ladies and gentlemen, the website of the Tricontinental Institute, where Vijay is the executive director, is displayed. I really advise you to have a look at it. There is a section that is in French also. There are some articles that are translated into French and other languages. And particularly if there are journalists among the viewers today, or who will see this program or this discussion, I really advise them to have a look to the content. It's really, really of high quality, with strong artistical touch, which I will ask you about at the end. So, Vijay, the key question I had in mind when I wanted to invite you for this discussion is about if what's happening is in Gaza be an escalation of the war in Ukraine, in the sense where it is a confrontation between the existing order led by the US and NATO, and the would-be or emerging new order, a multipolar order led by, I don't know, let's say China, Russia, Brics, and so forth. And when the West has seen that they cannot defeat Russia, when they have seen that there is a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, particularly those two events, when they have seen also the Brics being expanded to include countries like Egypt, like Saudi and Iran, I think, or maybe there was some kind of panic in the leaders of the existing world order, and they felt that they need to come up with an alternative, which might be, and I will listen to your views, the I2U2 alternative. I2U2, for those who doesn't know, is India, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and United States. Within this initiative, they have put pressure on Saudi to try to take them away from converging completely with Russia, China, India within the Brics, and we have heard MBS talking about normalization with Israel just during the last few months in the summer, and there was also talks that the Palestinian Authority is also accepting that framework, which maybe has led to Hamas to react as the managing party in Gaza, which was to be left aside. Your views on all this assumption, because I think it is important.
It's very important. Let's go back to the broader context first, and then come back to.
Sorry, Vijay, before I forget, because the same question I have put it as a small survey to the people who are following us to answer this question, to see their views, and at the end we will comment it. So, ladies and gentlemen, at the top of the chart you have the same question. It is in English and in Arabic, and we will comment on your views at the end of the discussion. Go ahead, Vijay.
Great. Now, first, I want to give a broad, general sense of what we have to look at. And the broad, general sense is the United States has weakened economically, substantially, and also militarily in one respect. I'll come back to what I mean by one respect. But first, economic. Over the past 30 years, US neoliberal policies has meant that large sections of the elite no longer really pay tax into their government. They hold their liquidity in tax havens and so on. Secondly, US capital is not keen to invest in infrastructure overseas, to put a lot of money overseas. They are making a good rate of return on profit in finance, in investing in, big, like BlackRock, investing in energy deals and so on. They don't want to build bridges and so on. They have lost interest in that. US capital has culturally drifted away from infrastructure spending and spending on real factories and so on. The Chinese, of course, with their vast surplus, have been spending on infrastructure. They've been spending on building factories. They're spending on trade and commerce and so on. What the United States has had to recognize is over the course of the past 20 odd years, large sections of Europe and large sections of the Arab world have been drifting into allegiances with China. Even Saudi Arabia, longtime ally of the United States, has now built more economic ties with China than with the US. So Mohammed bin Salman's, MBS's project of Saudi 2030 is largely to be financed with the Chinese and with Saudi money. It's not being financed by BlackRock or US state money, government money. No, they're looking east. The Saudis are looking east. Europe was the same. Most European countries, including Germany, found themselves looking east. German capital moved from building factories inside Germany to building factories in Wuhan province in China. So even European countries started signing up for the Belt and Road Agreement. The Dubai port is financed partly by Chinese capital, not by, the Emirati sovereign fund. It's financed by Chinese capital. Okay. So the United States saw that key old allies, Europe, the desert Arabs, the Emiratis and the Saudis, I like to call them all the desert Arabs, they began to look eastward to the Chinese. This created a lot of anxiety in the United States, particularly as China and Russia started to come together. So, in my opinion, your question about is there a connection between the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza? Yes, there is. But here's the connection. Both of them have to do with the United States' anxiety about that entire part of the world, from Europe down into the Arab world, looking towards China. Let's take the example of the G20 meeting held in Delhi. At the G20 meeting, United States, the European Union, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, and India created a project called the India, Middle East, Europe corridor for trade to go from India into Dubai, into Saudi Arabia, up into Israel to Greece. This was the corridor. Very interesting. By the way, side note, one of the main beneficiaries of this corridor was the industrialist Gautam Adani, who is a close partner of Mr. Narendra Modi, because Mr. Adani owns the port in Gujarat, he owns the port in Haifa in Israel, and he owns the port in Greece. This was really an Adani corridor as much as anything. Okay.
This is not a side note. This is a key note. I would call it. So we speak about it later. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So why is this such an important corridor? For two reasons. Number one, it pretends to sidestep the Chinese. Why do I say pretend? Because in fact, when you look at the corridor closely, the port in Dubai already has got Chinese investments. The ports in Greece are already filled with Chinese investment. So the Chinese are along this corridor. They are not being set aside. But the reason to build the corridor is to set the Chinese aside. Second issue, you will remember under the presidency of Donald Trump, Mr. Trump recognized that the countries of the Arab world were drifting away from US influence, including Saudi Arabia, towards China. And you see, Saudi Arabia is important because if Saudi Arabia goes, Egypt goes. Egypt is very much under the control of the Saudi royal family now.
Yes.
Mr. Sisi, for instance, he has to be very thankful to the Saudi royal family for helping him defeat the government of Mohammed Morsi, and the Brotherhood. That was a fight between Saudi Arabia on one side, Turkey and Qatar on the other. The old Saudi battle against the Muslim Brotherhood, against the Ikhwan. Okay. So Mr. Trump, very clever. Mr. Trump decided on a strategy that I think is quite clever. Mr. Trump saw there was an opening. He could bring together Morocco, Bahrain with Israel. This was the starting point of the Abraham Accords.
True.
Morocco and Bahrain were vulnerable. Morocco wanted Western Sahara. And so the deal of the Abraham Accords was US government says, King of Morocco, make a deal with the Israelis, we give you Western Sahara, as if Western Sahara was there for the US to give Morocco. But it was about recognizing the occupation of Western Sahara. Bahrain, very vulnerable country, vulnerable to Saudi Arabia and so on, but big US base. They also went along. Saudi Arabia was supposed to be part of the Abraham Accords, but Saudi Arabia didn't jump into the pond. You remember this. Biden's strategy of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor was to do a couple of things geopolitically. One, if they secured this, Saudi Arabia would de facto have normalized with Israel, because the corridor would have gone from the Rab al Khali up through the old Hijaz Railroad, right? From Riyadh up to Aqaba or wherever, and then to the port of Haifa. So the corridor would have de facto, in fact, made Saudi Arabia normalize with Israel. And the other advantage was it would enable United States to move Europe away from China and closer to India. So these were the elements of it. Keep China out, bring Saudi Arabia and Israel close together, and then draw the Europeans away from China towards India to become a manufacturing center. That was the logic of what the corridor was supposed to be. So I2U2, India, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and United States was part of this whole dance. And that was to bring the Emiratis de facto into a normalization process with Israel. You see, all of these were about normalization with Israel and keeping China out. That was the two part. What the Palestinian resistance did on 7th October was they shot the Middle East, India, Europe corridor in the head. Now, almost impossible for Mohammed bin Salman, the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia, almost impossible for him to allow this corridor to go through Israel. Almost impossible. Almost impossible. They may still. So the events of October 7th, in fact, threw US geopolitical strategy into a vortex. Couldn't control it. They still can't control it. At the same time, in Ukraine, that war has become a stalemate of possibilities. So strategically, the United States is finding itself caught with its plans overturned. The plans of the United States to use the Ukraine war to weaken Russia and to use this Saudi, Israel, India project to weaken China, none of these are working. In that sense, what Hamas did on October 7th is not just enter into these kibbutz. In fact, what Hamas did was they shot that whole project in the head.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Vijay. And I will come back to, or it is actually, it is in fact the next question where you can elaborate about. I didn't get the name. This businessman investor who's already investing in Haifa. So to understand, because this is very key to the Algerian followers. to understand the role of India and United Arab Emirates being, or at least for UAE having the intention to join the Brics, but in the same time partnering to I2U2. It is not straightforward for a non-observer.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, India is caught also in the middle of its own contradictions. You see, India was heavily reliant, in a way, on oil from Saudi Arabia and Russia and so on. So for India, when Russia entered Ukraine, 24th of February 2022, when Russia enters Ukraine, it was very difficult for India to condemn Russia because India relies on Russian energy. So India didn't condemn Russia and in fact said, we have an independent foreign policy, etc., etc. Secondly, India imports all its energy, except for coal. It imports all the oil and natural gas. India relies also on Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, very much. So for India to turn around and cut ties with Saudi Arabia and Emiratis is complicated. So for Modi, the link between India and Israel on the one side and the need for India to be in a connection with Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis and others on the other, this contradiction has become fundamental. And I believe the Indian government hoped, along with the United States, to use I2U2, India, Israel, United States, United Arab Emirates, and to use Middle East, India, Europe corridor, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and so on, as a way to get at least the main oil-producing Arab partners in the Gulf in some sort of alliance with Israel and India. Because this Indian government has a close link with the Israelis. And so they were keen, in a way, to neutralize the contradiction between being friends with the Israelis and needing the oil and natural gas from the Emiratis, Saudis, and to some extent the Qataris. See, India, like any rational actor, understands that if you go too close to the Israelis, then the Saudis, Emiratis, Qataris may say, no, wait. We have our own policy. We can't accept you if you're so close to the Israelis. The only people allowed to be so close to the Israelis and still have a close relationship to us are the United States. Only the United States can do that, not India. Okay. So India, aware of that, tried to bring through the US a project, I2U2, which is more political than commercial, and the Middle East India corridor, more commercial than political, trying to bring at least the Emiratis and the Saudis into some sort of de facto arrangement with the Israelis, which makes India neutralize the contradiction between Israel and its needs from the Gulf Arab countries. So that was India's attempt in there, which is now broken. And the way it broke, in a way, was because of the October 7th event. Otherwise, it was going along fine. Just be clear. It's not like Mohammed bin Salman was anti this approach. He was quite happy with it. Secondly, it was actually to India's benefit when China brokered an agreement between the Saudis and the Iranians. Because India also has close links to Iran. Absolutely. And also is interested in Iranian energy. True. But so, in fact, for India, everything was going fine. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Everything was going fine until Hamas's action and the other Palestinian, armed groups.
Okay. We will come back to UAE, but are you saying that for India, this ambivalence or trying to balance those two contradictions or complex situation is structural, is strategic, or is it just a matter of the current Modi's government? Because we remember, as Algerians, at the time of Nehru, India was quite different.
Yes. So from 1947, when India became independent, until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, India had a non-aligned foreign policy. I mean, I have visited Algiers. I've visited the beautiful building where the 1973 non-aligned meeting was held. In fact, I made a movie called Two Meetings and a Funeral. I made a movie shot partly in Algeria.
Is it on YouTube?
No, it's a 3-channel movie. It's a
Okay.
beautiful film. In fact, we shot part of it also in the sports complex where Niemeyer's beautiful dome can still be visited in Algeria. I mean, we
Sure.
traveled around Algeria, went to the university and so on. I loved being in Algeria. Went to
Thank
the
you.
Kasbah, walked around the Kasbah. I played football with some children in the Kasbah.
Splendid. Splendid.
One of those areas I
Awesome.
can. It was really charming. I mean, we visited the places where the FLN martyrs were killed. Several sites in the city to get a sense of the Battle of Algiers, which is very important for all of us. So at the time, that period, India had a very strong non-aligned foreign policy. Nehru was very much pro-Palestinian, pro-Algerian. The relationship between Boumediene, for instance, Boumediene had a very good relationship with Mrs. Gandhi. Mrs. Indira Gandhi said, Boumediene was somebody that she admired. A very bright man, by the way. I mean, very bright man. Howdy Boumediene. Really quite forgotten around the world, I should say. People remember Ben Bella and others, but they forget the next generations that came. And I think Boumediene for me was always an important figure, partly because he took the standard of the new international economic order, the NIEO. So India at the time was very much like Algeria, non-aligned and so on. You see, when the Soviet Union collapsed, at that point, India had certain problems. The Indian economy struggled very much from the debt crisis. So India needed to get a good deal from the International Monetary Fund. When India approached the United States and said, look, we want to get a good deal from the International Monetary Fund, we need to be getting a good deal from you. At that time, the United States directly told the Indian government the road to Washington from Delhi, the road from Delhi to Washington, it has to go through Tel Aviv.
Okay.
You have to first normalize fully with the Israelis, and then you'll get a good deal from the International Monetary Fund. And that's what India did in 1992. Then in 1998, the right wing government exploded 2 nuclear bombs. When the right wing government exploded these nuclear bombs, India could no longer import weapons from the US. United States has a Pressler Amendment, which is against nuclear proliferation. India is not a member of the treaty, for nuclear proliferation, the NPT. India is not a member. Okay, so when India exploded those nuclear bombs, Israel came in and said, "We will sell India US grade weaponry." Okay, we don't have any problem. So India became a major importer of weapons from Israel. India became a major importer. That changed the orientation. And when the right wing government of Mr. Modi came in 2014, Mr. Modi's anti Muslim policies, they went very well with the anti Palestinian policies, anti Muslim policies of Netanyahu. So
Excellent.
India and Israel then came closer. But I want to say that what really brought India and Israel close was the fall of the Soviet Union, a catastrophe for all of us.
That's true. That's true. Thank you very much, VJ. This is very important. That's why I was very happy that you accepted to talk to us, because this kind of perspectives we don't hear them in the mainstream media. Now coming back to UAE, I would like to use the word what they are playing between Brics Plus and I2U2.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, let's just admit that for a very long time, the Emiratis, the Qataris, and others didn't really have an independent foreign policy. I think we need to first admit that. For a long time, these countries took their orders from Washington, D.C. for a very long time. I mean, if you ever go particularly to Qatar, Qataris have so many US military bases. United States is everywhere. Saudi Arabia, you know, Saudi Arabia, what independent foreign policy did they have really? In Afghanistan, the Saudis and the United States went together, just like this. There was no gap between them. So, for a long time, these countries were entirely governed by their relationship to the US. With the declining power of the US, these countries have had to come up with new agendas. So, it's new for them. And they are dancing around trying to maintain their relations with the US, but come to terms with the new developments. That's how I see, for instance, that's what I think is happening in the United Arab Emirates in particular. They are trying to dance around. You see, they can't break with China, they can't break with the US. They are trying to find their way. And I feel a little bad for them. Having been on a leash, held by the United States for so long, now the leash is breaking. They don't know exactly what to do. They don't have a theory. And I think that's why you see them going back and forth. 1 minute, Mohammed bin Salman is there telling his people, we are going to be a great country. Saudi Arabia is going to be the hinge of the world, he said. No longer will Europe be the hinge. Saudi Arabia will be the hinge. Mohammed bin Salman, that's saying we are going to be very important, blah, blah, blah. Next minute, he's saying, okay, let's make a deal with the United States to bring India, Israel, and so on. They don't have clarity. They don't have clarity. Understood. And that's important for us to understand. You see, sometimes people like you and I, we look at this moment when the UAE is struggling to create a policy and we think, what's the policy? Must be a policy underneath. What I'm trying to say to you is sometimes you have to just accept the fact they don't know what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there is a saying in French, which, if I translate literally, is that we should not underestimate their non-understanding, for that matter. Okay, now a more specific question to India, Algeria / Brics. So in Algeria, there is a strong conviction that Algeria was not allowed or agreed to be in the first batch of BRICS countries because of an opposition of India. Okay, matter of fact, it's quite clear that no one else could have opposed Algeria than India. It had to be a strong country, as strong as India. The question is, particularly because when we look at the economic fundamentals, Algeria does much better, for example, than Ethiopia, than Egypt, than Argentina, for that matter. So we have zero debt. The Human Development Index in Algeria is better than all of those countries. So a lot of fundamentals does not add up when you see how the countries have been added, and there is a strong belief that India was behind it. There is one theory that says it's because of an investment of ArcelorMittal that went bad in Algeria back in the early 2020. But another theory, which is much more conspirationist, is that it was basically Israel pressuring UAE and France to ask India to oppose this. Is this just conspiracy or?
Well, okay. Algeria is a very important player in North Africa. In fact, indeed, in that whole region, not just North Africa. It's a very important country, right down into the Sahel and so on. So it's very clear that in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, France has taken a battering in the Sahel region and in West Africa. The anti-French sentiment that Macron experienced in the streets of Oran. When he was walking in Oran, people were yelling at him. Okay. Then in Guinea, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, there were coup d'etats to overthrow what was seen as pro-French governments. France has really been beaten up in Northern Africa, okay, from the Sahel above. Really not had an easy time in that whole region. Attempt to reverse the coup in Niger, very important country for France, didn't succeed. So much French nuclear energy is powered by uranium from Niger. They were not able to succeed. Now, it's my feeling that this is less about Israel and more about France. France is genuinely angry at Algeria, as you know. I mean, France and Algeria, I don't have to say anything more. Just
Absolutely.
saying the two names of the countries side by side should give you the answer. These are countries that have a long history. France occupied Algeria for so long, and so brutally. And not only in Algeria, but the treatment of Algerians in France has been shameful, shameful since from the 1960s at least. France has been very angry in what's happening in the Sahel region, and they have quite openly accused Algeria of playing a role there. Now, I actually don't know how much of a role Algeria has played in some of this. I don't know. I actually don't think Algeria has played such a big role. I think these countries have actually had processes of their own. They don't need an outside force, to drive it. But
Absolutely.
even within Algeria, there's rising new anti-French sentiment, as Macron experienced in Oran, new anti-French sentiment. In
That's
Tunisia,
that's why, sorry, between parentheses, we in Jazair Hope, we do programs like this in English. Matter of fact, Algeria has introduced English in all the levels of the scholarship.
as a protest against, well, I think Burkina Faso has said French is no longer a state language.
They followed Algeria.
Yeah, they followed Algeria. Even in Tunisia, which has a different history in a way. You remember the protests against Ben Ali? Those protests were also against France, because you remember Ben Ali was very close to the French government at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy. So what I have learned, and again, this is just what I've learned as a journalist. Mr. Modi went to Paris, met with Mr. Macron, and Mr. Macron several times said that he wants France to be India's major European partner. You may remember, you may not know this, there was a scandal in India about the purchase of French fighter jets from Rafael by this government, Modi government, from the French. And the scandal came at such a point that the French government actually defended the Indian government. So India and France, at the level of high officials, have a very close linkage. And I feel, this is a speculation based on some conversations with high officials. I feel that India might seriously have said not Algeria this time. I don't know for sure. You and I don't know for sure if it was
No
India.
No one knows. Yeah.
Yeah, but evidence suggests to me that in fact it was India that did say that they were not keen on having Algeria, but not because of Israel, but because of France. It's France that led this. It's my view. I don't know for sure. I want to be very clear with you.
We too, we don't know, and no one knows. It is just that there is a strong conviction among the people in Algeria that there was an opposition, and your view that if it was, it's more likely to be France. I buy into it strongly. Thank you very much for that, Vijay. Last question, which is related to what's happening a little bit in Sahel. As you might know, there is a project, a pipeline that should go from Nigeria to Europe, and there is two routes that have been discussed. One is through Algeria, Okay, the project, matter of fact, just yesterday, the foreign minister of Nigeria, which is quite not surprising, but interesting that the foreign minister talks about an economic project, not the energy minister. He said that the project going to Algeria is advancing very well. The characteristic of the project is that it should be finished by 2027, he said. The cost of it will not exceed $10 billion, and it will go through 3 countries, including Niger, Algeria, and Nigeria. The other project or route should go through 14 countries, and it should take, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years, $30 billion. UAE is supporting it. Lately, last week, there was the COP28 conference in Dubai. And for the first time during this conference, it was announced that fossil fuel should be gradually exited. Don't you see a contradiction, particularly when it comes to UAE? In one side, exiting fossil fuel, and in other side, supporting a project that will take 15 years versus another project who should be operational just in 2027. So isn't it another smaller scenario than I2U2 versus Brics Belt and Roads project?
See, it's so interesting to look at all these pipelines because they tell you so much. We're talking about the Trans-Saharan Pipeline project.
Yeah.
You remember there's a big dispute. Should it go through Morocco? That's an option. In fact, the Nigerians keep announcing they're going to start construction next year through Morocco. Does it go up Niger, Algeria, whatever? That's another option. I mean, the question here is twofold. Number one, in Yemen, there's going to be a escalating problems just started with shipping going through the Red Sea. A lot of European oil and liquefied natural gas goes through the Red Sea from the Gulf. Okay, that's where it goes. Now, this problem that is starting because of the Yemeni attacks at shipping, it's going to make the pipelines more attractive. But the pipelines have to go through anti-French territory. There's no area it can go through if it goes through Morocco, you're going to have to risk that it goes through the territory of the Sahrawis. Yes. That's not going to have no risks. If the Western Sahara movement begins again, people will attack the pipelines. This is an old story. If it goes up through Niger, the government of Niger is going to close the pipeline whenever it wants, because they are an anti-imperialist government of a kind. So there are no good choices right now for Europe, just to say. Europe has no good choices. In fact, that makes me a little happy. It's about time Europe didn't dictate the choices to us. It's about time we dictated some choices to Europe. Between the Yemenis on one side, the Niger on the other, and then the Sahrawis on this side, there's going to be a lot of problems for Europe getting energy. As it is, the Americans are not allowing energy to come from Russia. Where's it going to come from? Across the Atlantic from the United States, very expensive. Very expensive.
True.
So, as you said, this is filled with contradictions. And we know that history goes forward through contradictions, not through clarities. In fact, clarities help us act in the world. You need a clear theory to act in the world. But you act on the contradictions. That's what keeps propelling history forward. And right now, if I'm the Europeans, I would be very nervous that between the Yemenis, the people of Niger, the Sahrawis, and so on, it's going to be hard to get energy. Already they destroyed Libya.
Absolutely.
They destroyed Libya, okay? Without mercy again. They destroyed the country without mercy. You can't get the oil from there. It's not easy. All of this, all of the violence of the West is putting pressure on the West. You see, others are suffering also. The Libyan people are suffering. But alongside them is suffering the West. So, as you quite correctly said, this question of the Trans-Sahara pipeline, it's much easier to hold a press conference than to start building the pipeline.
Absolutely.
In the last several weeks, lots of press conferences in Nigeria, in France, and so on, even in UAE on the side, a lot of press conferences. It's easy to have a press conference. It's difficult to build the pipeline.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Look, it was 55 minutes of very, very nice discussion. I really appreciate it. Look, I am an Algerian based in Algeria. If you need anything from the country, whatever it is, please do not hesitate to contact me. Okay. I really appreciated the discussion. I am impressed that we have been through all those questions in 55 minutes, because each one of them would have taken a special discussion. So thank you very much for that, Vijay.
Firstly, I want to apologize that my Arabic starts and finishes in a very poor way. I used to live in Beirut. I should have learned Arabic. So first, I apologize to you. Secondly, I want to say that I very much appreciate being with you. And I want you to go in peace and to continue doing the very good work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Have a good afternoon or evening. I don't know what is the time there in Santiago, Chile. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind comments, instructive comments. For the English language, after 24 hours in general, YouTube allows for an automatic translation, so you can rewatch the program with French subtitles. Vijay, take you very much. Take care, and I hope to speak to you sometime soon. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum. Bye.
Salam.
احنا الشعب اللي تمشى بالحفاظ، عالشوك عجلي وعلى النار.
بن بولعيد واسمه مصطفى، علي لطوانت وبدي عمر. القصبة ما زالها واقفة وما زالوا عساس الدار، ما زالها سعلة السقيفة وما زالها حرمة الجار. أنا يا بلادي راني عارف، هما ما كانوش عارفين.
دهشوا نهار علي ما توقف، احنا عادتنا نموت واقفين. نموت على النيف والشرف، نموت على الوطن والدين. علمنا بلا ريح يرفرف، احنا هما الجزائريين. أنا يا بلادي على بالي، هما ما كانوش فاهمين.
حبوا يدي والبلاد ديالي، حسبونا ماناش قادرين. فكتهم حسيبة بنبوعلي الجميلة تونسى الأخرين. من حقك يا الجزائر تولولي ولدتي نساو رجال حرين. أنا يا بلادي سمحيلي، ما قدرتش نذكرهم كاملين.
واش نذكر واش نخلي، شهداء رواحهم طاهرين. مازالهم في قلبي وفي بالي، ربي يرحمهم أجمعين. والقصبة مازالها ديالي، وسط الدار والعرس واقفين.
يا القصبة وريلهم
قرصان رياس وساطيل على عروج وخير الدين احكي لهم
وفهم الناس اللي جاهلين
باللي الجزائر ما هيش ليهم ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين
باللي الجزائر ماشي ديالهم ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين